And that's, again, if you read all the Franz Bosch stuff, it's the same thing with Franz Bosch. He is always exercising the end of the movement. So except he uses different terminology. He says you always practice the finish. Your body will always learn how to get to that end point. It's something that the body recognizes. So no matter what the variability is of the environment or how you step or whatever, you're always going to end up in that position.
And then it goes even further into motor control, which is all joint position and how your brain interprets where your joints are in space. And like I said before, it's like a satellite system that's attached to each one of your joints. And those joints have to be able to absorb force. And when you can't in those certain joints, then it's expressed someplace else. So Jay said, the hell with that. I'm going to give you the perfect position to be in. And therefore, I know the message is being sent clearly all the time.
We're going to go through positions. How many positions does Jay have? He has 11, doesn't he?
Well, it depends. Sometimes he has 7, sometimes he has 11. I'm going to tell you this, through my emails, there's much more than what he puts out there. And then he'll talk about, well, those are just the basics.
But just to make sure we're going to hit all those major positions.
We're going to talk a lot about a lot of the different positions, but you can, and then this is part of Jay's teaching style, you can fill in where you want with the positions. Because once you know a squat, a lunge, you know just about anything when that comes to, anything from sit to stand or any type of walk or gait, right? So let's see what we got here.
All right, drum roll for the shift to swoop. There it goes.
Not bad, huh?
Oh, it worked.
Okay, so just in those 2 pictures on there alone, you have a one-legged, which DB Hammer would call a hip flexion squat. Jay would call a one-legged squat. There's a
Bulgarian split squat.
There's a lot of different names for it. But what Jay would tell you is 90-degree angles matter, okay? So definition of isometric, no movement, static contraction, a muscle without any movement around the joint, okay? And then all that the research was out there when people started talking about these isometrics 20, 30 years ago was the old research from the Russians saying that if you are doing what was that research, Chris? Do you remember? They were all taking b-ball, I think, and they were doing these isometric positions of at the joint angle, and you'd get strength 10 degrees over and 10 degrees.
Yeah, it's 15 degrees either way.
Yeah.
So any time that you're going through your joint angles, you get 15 degrees strength in either direction. But where it got tricky was, all right, let's say you've got your ankle in one direction or one way, but then all of a sudden you change your hip or knee angle, that it's a completely different thing. And that's where it got tricky. So that's where it starts to exponentially grow in the different positions that you have, because then you start throwing in the ball of your big toe as a joint. And now you've got 4 different joints that you've got to deal with, and you can strengthen your way through.
Extreme isometrics in general are Jay Schroeder's training ideas, okay? What it's not the Russian research that we just talked about at different positions and doing that. Is there a part of that could be what Jay does? Yeah, he did certain stops in certain positions along that full range of motion movement, but it wasn't a general, I'm going to push into something as hard as I possibly can, rip apart my muscular system, and that's how I'm going to get stronger. His whole thing was this extreme, slow pulling yourself into position, okay? In the sporting world, money positions, they're called zones of transformation. I think Douglas used to call them that. End range, stretch range, critical joint configuration, zones of transformation. There's a lot of different ways to talk about these end ranges. Jay thought that a lot of motor learning happens in those positions. And when you get into those positions, that's where the learning starts, okay? Then there was research that came out on muscle stiffness and isometrics and how important that was back then for the research with Peter Wayan of muscle stiffness and being able to run fast. So I clipped out some articles on isometric contractions on tendons, quadricep muscles, how we were we were going to get better, stiffer tendons and ligaments by doing this stuff, which is ultimately what you want to run fast. Here's one here, and I use this in my speeches now when I talk about pain, isometrics and pain. So isometrics in the literature, in terms of helping tendinopathy and all sorts of injuries that happen, is well written in the research.
Ebony Rio and Jill Cook are probably the best at tendinopathy and tendon strengthening and tendon functional stuff. So if you're looking to do some back research or looking up for podcasts, I know Jill Cook has done a few. She's really good, and Ebony Rio are the number 1 and 2 people, in my opinion. They're Australians, so they're worth checking out. And a lot of my the spring ankle model comes from stuff that she and Jill Cook have done. I just kind of changed things around by you talking about the different foot positions and knee positions.
And guys, for me, as it comes to the brain, and you guys know where I am with the neurology part of it, is these isometric positions, adding sounds of metronome, increasing the frontal cortex activation. There's a whole bunch of different things that isometrics can help from a neural standpoint. Okay, again, did I think Jay Schroeder knew this stuff 20 years ago? No, but we make this full circle, and it's kind of scary that we're ending up back in, not maybe in the exact system that Jay was preaching, but certainly has a lot of bells and whistles that go off with some of the current research. And I think that extreme isometrics have stood the test of time. Each system that you trace back, and this is one of the great things I think that Chris and I have to offer now, and it's because we're older, and I don't like to admit that, but we've seen a lot of different systems, okay? And we've seen them develop, but we know when a system starts, it's not the end all be all, okay? I look at, even with Douglas Heel and the Be Activated stuff, Chris and the guys who created RPR clipped out what they thought were the most beneficial things for an athlete to use to make themselves fire more appropriately, right? So that was an entire system that was clipped down into the fundamental aspects of what could really work, right? That's what we do. We go and study different programs, and we go, you know what? I'm going to use a little of the Charlie Francis stuff. I like that. Or Charles Poliquin, I love this one quote that he has, and it goes alongside with this. I like that. It might not always be spot on from A to Z, but you can certainly fit it into the things that you do in your belief system. So somewhere along the line, whether you're brain-based, motor control-based, gait-based, tendon stiffness-based, whatever your philosophies are and wherever they've shifted to, I think that extreme isometrics can play a small role or a major role, depending on, where your research has taken you. So let's talk about that extreme slow. We're talking about the movement that is so slow that you can't see it happening. Okay, I remember reading an email from Jay saying, we're talking about running 100 meters in a couple hours. That's how slow we're moving. And I'm like, oh God. And every time I'd send him video on me doing what would appear to be an end range isometric push-up, he'd say to me, well, you're not pulling. You stopped pulling. I'm like, well, I can't go any further. He's like, no. And this is the crazy stuff, is the intent matters. So now I circle back 20 years. Intent in joint position has a huge implication on human movement. Huge. Okay, so I think Jay called it pipes. Physiology, intellect, psychology, emotion, and spirit. And he would utilize those, all those words that he would use, pipes. You have to have that in every time you do an extreme isometric. And with that, you would then get the result you're looking for. And if any one of those things was not 100%, you're not getting it. Now, I don't know if that's 100% true, but I certainly know that intent matters. And one of the things that I think isometrics teaches you is you're holding for an extremely long time or pulling yourself into those positions. You become in touch with yourself a little bit about what the hell's going on, what you feel, what your foot feels like, what the hell your shoulder feels like in a lunge, or you just think crazy shit because you're there for so long. So intent matters. You're talking about energy systems that you can cycle through during the duration of some type of extreme isometric. You know, a lot of people will say that each system recovers itself. I'm not so sure we can put research on that to make that believable, but I certainly do know that you will cycle through the system at least once. Does it manage reflex patterns and reflex arcs? I think the joint positions do that. And I think at those end range positions, I think what you're having are these co-contractions that are oscillating back and forth. And that's where he talks about you're training at velocity when there's really no movement at the joint, right? So it's that vibratory frequency. And I think it's like between 15 and 30 hertz that goes pretty fast. And that's high velocity stuff. So in his mind, that's what that was. In my world, in joint actions, that's what's happening. And that's pretty cool. Then down the road, we came out with oscillating isometrics where we're actually trying to create those vibrations in the muscles to create that high speed stuff.
And again, science that overlaps, that gets into the Bosco stuff about the original vibrating platforms, that they actually vibrated at a frequency of between 28 and 34 hertz. So that number keeps popping up as far as the frequencies of what your muscles do. Now, it's kind of interesting is today we know that different muscles actually vibrate at different frequencies. So each different muscle or each sequence of muscles has its own frequency that it works at. Sorry about my dog coming to visit. But again, overlapping stuff that pops up again and again.
So if you put those joints into end range position, he thinks that those muscles are going to behave the way they need to behave, and that is oscillating at the frequencies they need to oscillate at rather than guessing what they oscillate at, right? So the body will naturally give you those vibrations, which that's kind of neat. Pulling the body into position. And what does that actually mean? We are trying to, we'll take the lunge, and that'll be my go-to as we start to talk. So the front leg of the lunge is utilizing knee flexion to pull yourself into position. And when you do that, it stabilizes the knee. And this is why I tell people what it's like.
I can see it in your glasses.
Okay. All right. So here's screen share. Let's go to this. Can you guys see that?
Yeah. Perfect. You got it.
All right. So now if you can see the band, it's around his calf right in here. Okay. So all I'm doing is putting him in a perfect squat position. Most squat positions were based off the old powerlifting way that people squat, and that's with their feet outside their shoulders. We don't do that. We're 6 to 8 inches apart with the feet, okay? And in order to teach this, I am pulling that band back away from the wall to create hip reflection, okay? So with that, it becomes an easier hold for him as his quads are long. Okay? So he's holding that position right there. Do we understand that? You can do that in the lunge. If I just brought his front foot forward and made him lunge, pull his front foot.
So I think someone's asking, is it essentially doing a wall sit? I think it's different than a wall sit. You're not actually pressing up against the wall like you do in gym class.
So here's the other way that Jay would tell you to know if you're doing it right. So if you were doing it on a floor with your socks on and you were to get down in that position, your feet would slip out going away from the wall, right? He wants you to pull towards the wall into knee flexion, okay? It's the exact opposite of what you think you should be doing. So most people want to brace on their quads and hold it there. What I'm telling you to do is try to pull your heels to your butt. And in that position, your brain, it's a really hard message to get to your brain to be able to do that. So if you walked up to him right now without that band on and you reached underneath his leg to touch his hamstring, it would be soft. If I pull with that band back on his heels, his hamstring's turning on. With that being said, he's going to go down further without any issues because those quads are lengthening. What he's done is, this is the last part of the video. So he started standing up with his feet about 8 inches. Heels are about 8 inches off that wall. So his lower back would be on the wall. Okay, everybody clear with that? And what we're doing is he's sinking down into that position as I pull on that band. So it's giving his brain that feedback of, oh, this is what it's like to have my hamstrings activated during a squat. Now, ultimately, you want to do it without the wall, right? Because that would be a regular squat pattern. Okay, so that's teaching that position and that squat.